I'm Opher.
And I'm Mike.
And this is Rockin Malaria.
And we're going to talk about how we both got into music. Now, I go back a long way, probably further than Chris, back to 1953, when I think I was about 6. We had a small holding just outside Hunmanby. And every night during the summer, we used to sit and watch the lights come on at Butlins Holiday Camp, which you could see, and listen to the radio. And the one song that I always remember is You Belong to Me by Joe Stafford. And I still play it now after all those years. But I think what really got me into rock and roll was probably 2 things. One was getting a television. And on television at that time, I think 1956, the BBC started with the first rock and roll programme, which was 6-5 Special. Now, if you look at what it was like, it wasn't exactly how we define rock and roll, but it was different then. It was completely different to what the rest of the things that the BBC were putting on. And the person that came out of that, for me, was Tommy Steele. He was huge, absolutely huge. He was a big rock and roller. I know people look back now and they say, well, he wasn't all that good, was he? He was really better as an entertainer, but he was. And the kids absolutely loved him. There was riots at his concerts. He sold lots and lots of records. And he was the first person to have a #1 album in the British album charts with the Tommy Steele story. And just to finish that bit off, that film, the Tommy Steele story, was out at the same time as Love Me Tender by Elvis. And they were both pretty similar with their audiences.
Well, Tommy Steele came out of that Larry Parnes school, didn't he? Where they chose that friendly first name, the boy next door, and then a sort of rock and roll sort of surname to go with it.
Yeah, he also did the 2 Hours Coffee Bar, which most people seem to come from in those days.
But back then, they thought rock and roll was going to die out very quickly, so he had a few hits with his rock and roll stuff, like Come On, Let's Go, and then they got him off onto Little White Ball and Family Entertainment, didn't they?
Yeah, singing the blues and all kinds of things. But as you say, I mean, people had to make a living, didn't they? And they couldn't see any future at all in rock and roll.
Yeah. Well, my first experiences, I suppose, was the radio. At home, my parents weren't into music at all, but the radio was on, and I used to listen to all of those comedy songs, the Bernard Cribbins Digging a Hole and Nellie the Elephant. And then when I got to be about 10, that was when I started getting into rock music. I mean, there was skiffle boom that was going on, and Lonnie Donegan, Rock Island Line. And I had a friend who was into Buddy Holly, and he used to have all the Buddy Holly singles, and he used to buy Buddy Holly and Adam Faith, and that was it. And when he got fed up with them, he used to sell them to me for pennies. So I got a collection of Buddy Holly and Adam Faith singles. And it's only looking back now I can see that Adam Faith was trying to be Buddy Holly, but the British production thing wasn't quite the same as American production. They didn't have a clue, really. But that's what got me into rock music was Buddy Holly and Adam Faith, and then the skiffle with Lonnie Donegan.
Yeah, well, I had also an elder brother who was in the Air Force at the time, and he used to bring home singles at the weekend, and that's when I got into Chuck Berry with Sweet Little 16 and Johnny Be Good, and lots more Eddie Cochran and things like that. But that lasted, I seem to remember, it lasted till about 1959. Then it all sort of faded away. At least the rock and roll side of it. It was very, very much became sanitised middle of the road music. And I moved on to. I still listen to American stuff, but for probably a couple of reasons, because I think people forget the BBC. Really, you could write off. Apart from Saturday Club. Saturday Club was good, and that started about 57. There was some good stuff. I mean, if American rockers came over, they all did Saturday Club on Saturday morning, which was okay. But generally speaking, request programs were, you just didn't get any rock and roll on there.
Yeah.
But there was Radio Luxembourg. Now, really, I think most people listened to Radio Luxembourg, didn't they? I think that was
And you could just, it used to fade in and out. I can remember getting down the bed covers after I meant to be in bed, playing Radio Luxembourg under the covers. It faded in and out and in and out. But they were the only radio station playing anything decent.
But you see, there was also American Forces Network.
I didn't get that.
Yeah, see, my mum used to listen to American Forces Network. I haven't a clue why she listened to it, but she did. And they played all sorts of stuff. They weren't limited by like the BBC were. They just played everything out the American charts, and there was some good stuff.
Well, I didn't cotton on to Chuck Berry, Bo Diddley and that sort of thing until most probably 1963.
Yeah.
And but I did discover Little Richard. Yeah. And Little Richard, when I was 12 years old, just blew me away. And I had that album, Here's Little Richard, and it was just fantastic, raw rock and roll.
Well, I remember listening to that. That was the first time I ever heard Long Tall Sally. It was just totally different to anything I'd heard. There was rock and roll, and then there was Little Richard and Long Tall Sally.
Yeah.
Didn't understand any of the words, but it was really fast, and I liked that.
Well, Little Richard made Elvis Presley look quite tame, particularly when Elvis, after he joined the army, was coming out all that pop stuff, really.
Yeah.
But Little Richard was the real thing. And I was just knocked out by that raw sound that he produced, and it was so exciting for a 12, 13-year-old to have that. I remember going in, we had a school fete, and I took my record player in, and here's Little Richard. And I became a living jukebox and paid requests, and they just played that all afternoon, and I must have made at least 5 shillings.
Well, I get about in the early 60s very much. I got into English instrumental bands. I mean, there was when the Shadows came out of the Cliff Richard thing, and following on from there were so many instrumental bands appeared.
Yeah.
And, you know, some were good, some were great. They never quite made it. The ones I liked, I think the Outlaws, who had a very early... Chas Hodges was in it, and also Richie Blackmore. Very young was Richie.
Gosh.
He must have been about 17, 18. But the thing about it was, I think if, in retrospect, looking back at all these bands that were around England at the time, and they were all banging away with the suits and doing Shadows numbers, but they weren't always doing Shadows numbers. A lot did it. A lot did vocals as well, but they were becoming bands, and they were becoming good bands, and it was all ready for the explosion.
Well, the Shadows was the first album that I ever bought. Shadows' Greatest Hits.
Yeah,
that was absolutely fabulous. And I remember when Apache came out and buying the single. That was absolutely incredible. Yeah. But people also forget that Cliff Richard, the first album he did, was absolute rock and roll, and that was a good album. Yeah. You know, it was only the same thing happened to him that happened to Tommy Steele. Yeah. That they took him into middle of the road rubbish, didn't they? Really?
Yeah. Well, I remember that was the first big band I ever saw with the Shadows. I saw them in Hull, and I was so impressed. I mean, they were very, very good. And this is
was that the original lineup?
The original lineup with Jet Harris.
Jet Harris, yeah.
And I mean, Jet was a great bass player. I mean, he really was.
He had the looks as
He's
well.
He's very
didn't
underestimated.
Yeah.
He just had a few problems to Jet.
Yeah.
I think was
drink mainly.
Yeah. But he went on for ages, you know, because he was when Jeff Beck started the Jeff Beck group with Rod Stewart. He wanted Jet as the bass player.
Did he?
Yeah, but unfortunately Jet didn't turn up, which was. Yeah. But I think that was after he'd had his accident, hadn't he? Because he had a dreadful car crash,
did, didn't he? Yeah.
Which set him back years. But going back to those instrumental bands in England. I mean, there were bands all over the country who were good, and as soon as the Beatles arrived, it just exploded, all of it.
Yeah, that's right. I remember the Spotniks. Remember those?
Yeah.
They used to speed up their records.
Bo Winberg.
Bo Winberg, yeah.
Yeah, because
that was great.
He only died, I think it was last year or the year before.
Did he?
And he was still playing. And he was still playing Orange Blossom Special. Yeah. At 90 miles an hour, yeah.
Yeah, they used to be in spacesuits, didn't they?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was, but all that. But I think it all stopped. Well, it all sort of changed, didn't it?
Well, there's certain watersheds, aren't there? I
Yeah.
mean, if you look back, I mean, the Beatles were a watershed, and
Yeah.
everything that happened before the Beatles was just blown away, wasn't it? Really.
Yeah.
And I think they set off a different type of music.
Yeah. I often think, I've thought about it quite a lot when they talk about Merseybeat, and it was huge, wasn't it?
Oh, massive!
It was absolutely huge. But if you look at Merseybeat, the only real original band to come out of Liverpool was the Beatles, weren't they? They wrote their own songs, which were totally different to anybody else. Most of the other, when the producers and A&R men went in there and pulled them all out, they were all doing songs that were written by, probably odd one or two by the Beatles, but most of them were done with either copies of American songs or songs that were written by English tunesmiths.
Well, the Mersey sound, I mean, that started up in the early 60s, really.
Yeah.
A couple of years before it was picked up, and they were really doing all the R&B and rock and roll stuff from America, which was being brought in on those merchant ships. But they weren't doing anything original. And Beatles were the only one doing things that were original.
If you go around, I mean, I remember Hull at the time when I used to go to see bands, and before it all happened, and bands were also doing rock and roll stuff and R&B stuff, and it was pretty general. And I've often thought if the Beatles had been anywhere else, if they'd come out, if they were from Birmingham, it would have been Birmingham mania, because they would have. There was the bands there, and the A&R men would have just gone in like a shot, and they would have had them all out.
Yeah,
because I think England was ready for it. I mean, you look at the bands in Liverpool, in London at the time. I mean, the Flamingo Club and places like that. I mean, there were some really good bands and real musicians. But when the beat thing came, they sort of got involved with it.
It was quite incredible to be 13, 14 at that point in time when Merseybeat hit. Yeah. And you look back on that now, and it was a very sanitised sound that they produced. There was very few of the bands that came out of that era that actually had a good, raw sort of sound. I think the Searchers did it on their first couple of albums, the Beatles and Big Three, that EP that the Big Three produced, that was just absolutely superb. Yeah. But most of the stuff that we think of as Merseybeat, Billy J. Kramer and Jerry and the Pacemakers, they were sanitised and very poorly produced, really.
But when you look back, I mean, I'm sure you've heard that live EP by the Merseybeats.
Yeah, fabulous.
Now, that was amazing, and because you'd never have thought the Merseybeats were like that, would you?
No.
But their club act was totally different to the singles they were putting out.
Yeah, same with a lot of them.
Yeah.
And I remember those Oriole albums. Do you remember those Oriole albums? This is Merseybeat. Where they had poorly recorded, but really great sort of acts that were doing their stage act. And that really was an exciting sort of album. I remember at the time getting hold of those, and it was exciting.
Yeah.
It was we've discovered our own music, I think.
Yeah.
I think for me at 13, 14, to have Merseybeat was like the first time I thought, this is ours, this is for us. And before that, it was rehashing rock and roll.
Yeah, I think that was pretty general though, wasn't it, when you think about all over the country. I mean, there was an English sound.
Yeah.
Probably they were doing covers and stuff like that, but it was an English version of it, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was, very much.
And it was what people wanted.
Yeah.
And as soon as the Beatles started it, they just came out the woodwork.
Yeah.
And there was bands from all over the place.
Well, I can still remember that first time when I heard the Beatles, which was, I saw us standing there. It was my friend Tony who sat me down in his bedroom and said, I'm going to play you this. And he just bought Please Please Me, the album, and played me that track, and it just blew me away. I saw us standing there. It was totally different to anything else I'd ever heard, and the power of it was just immense. And as a 13-year-old to sit and hear that, it just altered life, really.
Yeah.
That was amazing.
But the way they were, I mean, I remember those first few singles, they were always on calendar and the northern TV programs, local TV programs, doing the new single, and they came across very much as ordinary lads. I mean, I know that's a sort of a cliched thing, but they did come across.
Yeah,
they weren't sanitised.
That's right.
They talked, they laughed, and they joked just like everybody else, and they just became so big.
Yeah,
and I think
it was good that Epstein allowed them to express themselves and be that, because he tidied them up a lot.
Yeah,
but only to an extent. And the other bands, I think he tidied up too much. You know, Mersey Beat only lasted a year, didn't it? Yeah. 63, and that was it. And by the end of Mersey Beat, we started getting those other bands coming through.
Yeah.
You know, Rolling Stones, The Animals, Pretty Things, The Who. There was just one after another. Every week seemed to be a different band. And that beat boom that started there, the Kinks, there was so many great bands that came out of that year.
But you'd also had this phenomenon, this strange phenomenon in England, the blues booms.
Yeah.
There's been 2 or 3 blues booms, but there was the first one, wasn't there? Which Alexis Corner and Cyril Davis and those people. I mean, when you think, where this came from, they'd virtually got hold of a totally alien music from across the Atlantic, and it just became huge.
Yeah.
And I always think all these middle class lads swapped Ellen Shapiro and Matt Monro for Howlin' Wolf and Chuck Berry and all these people, and the musicians that came out of that to some extent are still around today. The Beatles, not the Beatles, the Rolling Stones, they came out of that first blues boom, didn't they?
Yeah. But the person who started all of that was Chris Barber.
Yeah.
And Chris Barber was really into the blues, and he brought across people like Muddy Waters. Yeah. And I think having those American blues artists across enabled a lot of very young people like Keith Richards to see authentic blues, and that's what got them into it. And then you had the Alexis Corner Blues Incorporated, so important and such a seminal band, and that's what spawned that first British blues boom, really.
And then you got, on the heels of that, you got the folk blues festival concerts which came round.
Yeah. That was a little bit later.
Yeah, but it was followed on. There was a big story about how it was on in Manchester, and almost half the guitar players of the last 50 years went to see this.
That's right. Yeah.
Muddy Waters and Little Walter and all those people on it.
Yeah,
Sonny Boy Williamson.
See, when I was 14, I was most probably into all the Mersey Beat pop stuff.
Yeah.
But I had a friend who was into the blues, and my friend Dick Brunning only was interested in blues, and he used to play me Lightning Hopkins, Muddy Waters and Howlin' Wolf, and it took me a while to get my ear into it because you couldn't understand the lyrics at first, but once you got tuned in, it was just fabulous. So I was listening to Mersey Beat and the blues, and then I had another friend who was into Woody Guthrie. So I had these 3 different things going on at the same time. And then Bob Dylan came out, and that was a major watershed for me.
But you get, it's the blues thing, though. It didn't mean anything in America at the time.
No.
Nothing. Black people didn't want anything to do with it. It was Uncle Tom's music.
Yeah.
Yet here it was absolutely incredibly big. There's the story, isn't there, where the Stones went on, I think, that programme called Shindig, and they wouldn't go on it unless Howlin' Wolf was on it.
Yeah, that's right. And that was a fabulous performance.
Yeah, it was
Howlin'
great.
Wolf.
Well, he was marvellous on Howlin' Wolf.
Yeah.
But all this, it's this blues boom. You got the blues boom, the beat boom, and it's all bands, isn't it? All playing.
Well, it's quite strange when you look at 1964, because of all those bands that we were just talking about, there was the blues ones that were very sort of into the blues.
Yeah.
Them, Rolling Stones, Yardbirds, they all came out of that blues boom. But there was a more mod one that took the blues and adapted a little bit, like the Kinks and the Who. So you had that mod sound coming through. And that was based on the sort of swamp blues more than the authentic Chicago blues. And they were enormous. So you had so many different things going on.
Yeah.
Then you had other ones like Small Faces with producing a different sort of sound.
Yeah.
And I think that beat thing set off in different directions.
Yeah, because you had, there was a second blues boom as well, wasn't there? About 65, 66, where Fleetwood Mac came out of.
Yeah.
Chicken Shack, Christine Perfect, and John Mayall was at his peak then with,
that
with
was
Eric Clapton.
the seminal band,
that
wasn't it?
came out of it as well, and it boosted it, and that went. The people they produced was amazing, Fleetwood Mac.
Fleetwood Mac, Chicken Shack. Do you remember Duster Bennett?
Duster Bennett, the amazing one-man band.
Yeah, incredible. He died, coming back from a gig.
Yeah.
Went to sleep in a car and had a crash.
I'm not surprised.
Yeah.
But he was great. Was Duster. He used to play a lot with Fleetwood Mac because I think he's played on a couple of Fleetwood Mac records.
Well, they were on that Blue Horizon label,
Blue Horizon
weren't they? Yeah.
label, that was great.
Yeah, that was a brilliant label.
But all that 60s, I think it all sort of came from the blues boom and the blues and the Mersey beat thing. And
Cream came out of that as well, didn't they?
Yeah.
And they started really as a blues group, but they evolved very quickly. If you look at Fleetwood Mac and if you look at Cream, they rapidly became more psychedelic, more progressive rock. Yeah. And what was going on at the time there was Hendrix coming across and bringing a different thing.
Everything. But it's another thing, if you look at Cream and how long they were together and what they did, it was only a couple of years.
At most,
That was
2
all.
years.
Yeah, then you go back, it's the same with Buddy Holly if you go back to the rock and roll time. These people were only around for a couple of years.
Yeah.
But the stuff they did and the music they left.
Well, Hendrix was...
Yeah, Hendrix is another one. How long was he? It was,
2-3 years?
2-3 years, yeah.
Yeah. And you think what he recorded in that period of time, I think there was only 3 official albums out when he died.
Yeah.
But I must have about 100 hours of stuff.
And it's still coming out, isn't it? And it's still coming out. Yeah.
And I could listen for hours to some of that stuff with him noodling away in the studio. It was just absolutely incredible.
Yeah, absolutely. And there was all and by this time, hadn't it? By this time, the Americans had sort of retaliated, hadn't they?
Yeah. Well, they'd cottoned on to it a bit. Yeah, Paul Butterfield, and there was some great stuff.
Yeah, and the bands just got... a lot of the American bands at the beginning of it were definitely a bit ropey. The classic one, it's probably sounds sacrilege to say it, but I remember I really thought the Grateful Dead would be wonderful, because I think I was attracted more or less by the name. So anybody called Grateful Dead, it's got to be good. Yeah. And I bought the first album, and I didn't think much to it at all. I thought it was really third rate, and I just forgot about them completely.
Yeah.
But coming back years later, they were a different ballgame altogether.
Oh, yeah.
They were a great band, right the way up to the passing of Jerry Garcia,
Yeah. I saw the band that, after Garcia had died, I saw the band play in San Francisco.
Yeah.
Absolutely amazing band. They were called Fervor after Ken Kesey's... Ken Kesey had that van that they went round in filming the Merry Pranksters, with their acid tests and everything. Well, they called the band Fervor. They were absolutely amazing 3-hour concert.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Well, they
incredible.
used to do that, didn't they? They were noticed for it. There was that big joke, wasn't there? The Grateful Dead are bringing a 3-album set out after the European tour, and we know which 3 songs they're playing.
Right. What was the first band you ever saw live then?
Well, I say the Shadows were the first one, but after that, I saw loads of local bands. But I think the next big one after that was the Big Three.
You saw the Big Three?
I saw the Big Three at at this majestic ballroom in Hull.
So what were they like?
Well, they were brilliant.
Johnny Gustav.
They were, but it was funny, those bands, in a short time I saw the Big Three, and I also saw Dave Berry and the Cruisers.
Right.
When he'd only be about 20 with Dave then, and they were absolutely brilliant. It was all rhythm and blues stuff.
Yeah.
I know he had all these bits and bobs, but he was absolutely spot on.
Yeah. First band I ever saw was the British Birds with Ron Wood.
Oh, right.
And that was one of the most exciting things I've ever been to, and one of the best gigs. And that was at the Walton Palais, you know, where Jonathan King used to go and pick up all those kids from there, had quite a reputation. But it was a real seedy place. I mean, there was a knife fight out in the yard before I went in.
Yeah.
I was 14 years old, and I was going into a different world.
Yeah.
And inside it was all gloomy, and there was all these teddy boys standing around with greased back hair and sideburns, and yeah, it was an amazing sort of place. But the atmosphere was just absolutely spot on, and that band were just incredible. The excitement of them. And I remember them all doing all of that really loud beat music, the synchronisation of things, and they looked the part with their Chelsea boots and long hair. It was just absolutely incredible.
Yeah.
And that was the first band I ever saw.
I think one of the most influential bands I ever saw was when we were down in London for one weekend at college. It was going to see the House of Commons, I think, and we went to the Flamingo on a Saturday night, and John Mayall's Blues Breakers were on, but it was with Eric Clapton just before the Beano album, and they were doing all the songs, and it just blew your mind away completely. But the Flamingo was interesting because it was the place that was heavily involved in the Profumo affair.
All right.
They all used to go down there and dance, and I think that's where a lot of the people involved in it actually met. But there was all sorts of strange people in there. But the atmosphere was unbelievable.
It was very multiracial, Flamingo, wasn't it?
It was, yeah. But I've never ever been to a club like it. There was no violence, but it was just, I don't know. You could feel the atmosphere. And when the band came on, it was just like something else. I mean, I'd seen Eric Clapton with the Yardbirds, and he was very smart. He looked like the mod from round the corner, and he played nice little twinkly solos. But this was a different ballgame altogether. It was All Your Love, the old Otis Rush thing, and it was just like a knife.
That was real blues, wasn't it?
Yeah,
And
just
he was
like
playing superb back then, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was. He was just off the planet.
Well, for me, Clapton, there was Mayall and then Cream, and after that, it was Cabaret for me.
Well, I mean, I think when they go on about important albums, I think the Beano album by John Mayall's Blues Breakers, it was a world changer.
Yeah.
Guitarists changed completely.
Yeah.
And everybody wanted to play a Les Paul and sound like Eric Clapton. And they've been doing really that ever since.
But you see, John Mayall went on to include some absolutely superb guitarists.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember seeing him when he had Greenie in the band, and he was absolutely incredible.
Yeah.
Absolutely superb guitarist.
Yeah.
And I preferred him to Clapton when he was with Mayall.
Yeah.
And then, when he left to form Fleetwood Mac, Pete Green was just absolutely mind-boggling, and they were a brilliant band. I used to love going and dancing to them.
Yeah. Well, then you got, after that, you see, in comes Mick Taylor.
That's right.
And Mick was a heck of a guitar player.
Yeah, he was superb.
Yeah,
And of course, the Stones nicked him, didn't
Yeah, that album he was on, the Crusade, wasn't it? The Crusade album.
Yeah.
There were some lovely solos on there.
That's right.
But
Well, I think the Stones' best stuff was when Mick Taylor was with them. I think he added an element to the Stones that transformed them.
I think he
Absolutely
was
superb.
absolutely, because I think Brian Jones, before Brian started to, well, he had problems, but still they started to show, because he was very influential in the early days with them. I mean, Ruby Tuesday and all those things. I mean, Mick and Keith probably wrote the songs, but Brian was very important in the arrangements and made him a little bit
He was the best musician
different.
in the band, wasn't
he? And then when he lost it, but in came Mick Taylor, and they sort of got this edge, didn't they?
Yeah, that's right.
It moved away, and it became a really hard rock and roll edge. And he's playing, I mean, stuff like Little Red Rooster and those kind of things. No, sorry, not Little Red Rooster. Midnight Rambler.
Yeah.
Midnight Rambler. Great songs.
I don't think people realise how much Brian Jones actually... It was his band. The Rolling Stones was his band. And I think he got shoved out by Keith and Mick. And he never recovered from it. He was peripheralised, and I think he just went to pieces, really.
Yeah.
I don't know if it was a breakdown. There's a lot of drugs involved, but he just wasn't there, was he?
Well, I remember reading that book, Stone Alone, by Bill Wyman.
Yeah.
And Bill was talking about it. I mean, and Brian in the early days was definitely the man. I mean, all of it. I mean, Brian had his own car. I mean, he travelled in a separate car to the rest of them. But then Lou Goldham saw that Mick and Keith could write songs.
Yeah.
And that's when it started, and he started to be marginalised, which it
was Brian's guitar playing on Little Red Rooster, wasn't
absolutely, yeah.
And he nailed it absolutely perfectly.
I mean, it was Brian's band, wasn't it? He had a band. I mean, the band was... I mean,
that was number one, and it was a Howlin' Wolf song like that, Absolute Blues, and it got to number one.
But the first album, the first Rolling Stones album, that's another absolute classic.
Yeah.
It really was. I mean, it was an absolute belter, wasn't it?
There were some great blues songs on there.
Great stuff on there.
I Just Want to Make Love to You. That Muddy Waters cover was just brilliant.
Yeah, I mean, and that was Brian.
King Bee.
Brian was behind it all.
Yeah.
And eventually, he was definitely eased out of it. There's no doubt about that.
But did his sort of collapse happen before or after he was being eased out?
Well, I said, going back to what Bill Wyman said. Bill said it happened. Brian didn't turn up for recording sessions.
Right.
But Bill said he had really serious asthma problems. I mean, he wasn't a strong bloke.
No.
And he'd suffered with it all his life. And he said, in retrospect, he thinks we should have been more accommodating, because he definitely was ill. Nothing to do with drugs. I mean, drugs obviously pushed it all on, but he wasn't a well person at all.
But he also had that big ego thing, and I think that went to his head as well. And you can see that. I remember at Monterey seeing him, and he was going around pretending he was some sort of prince, wasn't he? Really.
But I mean, think about it though. I mean, you're a young lad. You suddenly become absolutely huge.
Yeah.
You've got loads of money, and the worst thing is you've got people telling you that you're great.
You live in a bubble, don't you?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely.
Yeah.
And, some people can cope with it. It doesn't bother them. But some people, you can't cope with it, really.
Well, it must be very strange to have that. You need to have that ego to be able to go out on stage in front of tens of thousands of people and perform.
Yeah.
You've got to think you're really good to be able to do that.
Yeah, I agree.
And if you haven't got that, I don't think you can perform.
No.
But at the same time, it eats you away, doesn't it?
No, I think it does.
The same thing that happened with Brian Jones, I think it happened with Van Morrison as well. The second band I ever saw was them, the original them, and they came across, and Baby Please Don't Go was in the charts, and they played the Wharton Palais, and I saw them there, and they were smashing. After the gig, they invited everybody backstage, and they gave out these postcards, and they were all signed by the band. Yeah. I got 2 of those. I wish I'd had them now. But Van Morrison was really friendly and everything. You see him later, and he's developed this star persona. He won't talk to anyone or do anything. I think it eats away people. I think.
It does. I think it definitely did with Van Morrison. I mean, he's noted, isn't he? I mean, even Spike Milligan said he was a strange bloke. Which is coming from Spike. Yeah. But he did. But I think after when going back to Brian Jones and Mick Taylor, the 70s came along, didn't they? And it was interesting to see how it all developed in the 70s.
Yeah.
Because I think you had the late 60s, you had all the stuff from San Francisco, didn't you? Which was really strong.
Huge.
And then you had the Woodstock at the end. And Woodstock made a lot of bands, didn't it? I mean, Santana and people like that.
But if you look at the strange phenomena that happened in the late 60s, we moved from singles into albums.
Yeah.
And a totally different thing. And we had 2 scenes going, didn't we? Yeah. We had the underground rock scene, with bands like Hendrix and whatever crossing over, but we had the chart stuff.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to see back now, when you look at the media, how they represent the 60s. They go for all the chart stuff.
Yeah.
But the big scene was the underground scene.
Yeah.
And that was where all the bands like Traffic and Hawkwind and Pink Floyd, they were all playing an underground scene there.
Yeah.
And bands came across from America like The Doors, Love, Buffalo Springfield, and that was all part of an underground scene.
Yeah.
And that's where Monterey and Woodstock and things came out of. It came out of the underground.
Yeah, that's very true. Yeah, but it's funny, you know. I found when I was working in the music business, how there was the two sides, the underground and there was the charts. Now, fans, if you were an underground fan, you were an underground fan. If you liked Hendrix, you didn't like the Tremolos, and you didn't like anything that was in the charts at all. It was just they were persona non grata.
Yeah.
Yet when I went into in the business, I found that the musicians were totally different.
Yeah.
They all got on, no matter who they were, and what bands they played in. They all got on. They were just chatting. I mean, you'd have, just for argument's sake, you'd probably have a member of the Tremolos sat with Eric Clapton, having a chat, having a cup of tea and the rest of it. But they were musicians.
Yeah.
That's what they had in common. Whatever they played. But, you know, but you go see
certainly not what...
you go see a fan. You go see a fan. Poor.
Yeah.
You read the music papers and... But John Peel was a bit like that, you know. I mean, John Peel... He could be a bit narrow-minded at times, but other times he wasn't.
Right.
He liked things that you'd never think he would have liked.
Yeah, quirky stuff.
Yeah, quirky stuff. I always remember in the 60s, the early 70s, he decided he liked that Carpenter's single, Goodbye to Love, which had the wonderful guitar solo in the middle. And he used to play it and play it and play it.
Gosh.
And I thought, and it was the same. It was the same with Teenage Depression, wasn't it?
Yeah.
That he liked by the undertones. I mean,
Teenage Kicks.
Teenage Kicks. Yeah. When he said he had to stop his car because he was in tears the first time he heard it, I thought maybe.
Yeah, well, he did like that.
Yeah. They played it at his funeral.
The thing is, when you look back on the 60s, we were so incredibly lucky because all those bands were accessible. They were playing all the time, and they were playing small clubs.
Yeah.
Not only that, you didn't have to pay much to get in.
No.
I was paying 12.5p to get in to see a band.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know,
yeah.
I remember
Makes a
seeing
big
Led
difference.
Zeppelin for 25 pence
Yeah.
in a small club.
Yeah.
Absolutely superb. And Pink Floyd were available. You go and see them in pubs and things. It was just an incredible time. And not only that, there wasn't any security. You could go and talk to the guys after.
Yeah.
So after a gig, you could go and have a chat with someone about how. And they were ordinary people. They didn't put on these airs and graces.
Yeah, I remember there was a poster. It would be about 1966, 67 for the Skyline Ballroom in Hull.
All right.
And they had 3 acts. There was The Move, Cat Stevens, and Jimi Hendrix. And there were 12 and 6 each tickets. But if you bought all 3, you could have more for 30 shillings, which is £1.50.
Yeah.
That's for 3 bands. And they were all top of their...
Yeah.
I mean, it's different now. I know the whole business has changed now completely. So,
Yes,
I mean,
it has.
with the way they don't get royalties and everything that goes on with it. But it's changed completely.
Well, there used to be a whole lot of free gigs. I mean, I'd go regularly to free gigs. Hyde Park was all free. Yeah. And you'd have the top bands there. Some absolutely superb
Well, you see,
bands.
the Rolling Stones there's a big concert there, and I saw Blind Faith.
Yeah, so did
I
I.
mean, they're huge, absolutely huge
massive,
concerts, weren't they? Absolutely
but
massive.
Before that, there was smaller ones where there was 400 or 500 people, and people like Soft Machine and Pink Floyd and Edgar Broughton Band. Yeah, absolutely superb.
But there was in East Park in Hull, I remember there was one which had Wishbone Ash and Edgar Broughton, and I think the Rats from and Mick Ronson and a couple more things, you know.
Yeah.
And it was that summer people accepted it,
Yeah,
you know, they liked
that's
it,
right,
and that's what people did.
And Roy Harper was compere in Hyde Park. He used to compare the whole thing. And then when the Stones came along, they wouldn't let him on. Wouldn't let him on stage. It was absolutely amazing.
That Stones concert in Hyde Park, it's quite well, it's not amusing, but I remember when we listened to it, when it was in Hyde Park, it really wasn't that good. But the sound and the rest of it.
Yeah.
And it was the first time they'd played live with Mick Taylor. Now, if you listen to it, you listen to the DVD of it, it's great. It's absolutely spot on. So I think somebody's done a little bit of fine-tuning, I think, with it.
Yeah, most probably.
But
it was an exciting gig, though.
Oh, it was great. Yeah. It was so many people there, wasn't there?
Yeah.
So many people there.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think they expected to get that many, but, I mean, you think that the possibility of trouble at a thing like that.
Yeah. So going back to the blues thing, did you get to see any of the old blues guys?
Yep, I saw Sonny Boy Williamson.
Oh, I wish I'd seen him.
At the university. And Little Walter.
Right.
I liked harmonica players. I saw him at the Gondola, but he was absolutely... I think he'd had too much to drink.
Yeah.
But he still was a wonderful player.
Yeah, I saw Jimmy Reed and he was completely pissed out of his mind, but it was still absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, I saw
absolutely amazing.
Muddy Waters at the uni. And it was interesting because, I mean, I was so fortunate I knew Ed Bicknell was a secretary, so he knew I liked him, so I went in the dressing room and had a chat with Muddy Waters. But there was another bloke with me, Baz Davis, I think they called him, but I was sort of trying to talk to him about blues, and Baz, all he wanted to know was, did he like the Pink Floyd? But the thing about Muddy Waters was, he was so overpowering. That's the impression I got. He was a big, thick-set man.
Yeah.
And he was very, very pleasant and very, very polite.
Right.
But I've always looked back on that, and I was so fortunate to have met him.
Yeah, amazing.
A man who
I saw him three times.
So much influence on everything.
Yeah, saw him 3 times.
Yeah.
He was amazing. I saw him with Otis Spann on piano. Absolutely incredible. But I was lucky because I went to those blues festival things that they did at Hammersmith Odeon in London. And I was able to catch people like Son House and Bucker White and Skip James. And that was just shortly before they all died. Yeah. And Son House was just absolutely amazing. And you're looking at somebody who was there who taught Robert Johnson how to play. And just incredible. I look back on that and think how fortunate I was to be able to see those.
The big one, though, is the one that missed out. I always think is Elmore James.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, the poor bloke, he died just before. He would have been huge, wouldn't he?
He was incredible. I was just playing him this morning. Absolutely amazing. And I never get fed up with that guitar sound of his. He had a unique guitar sound. I don't think anybody ever did that.
No, I don't think they did, ever.
When I was in the States, I went over and found a place, I think it was on Hickory Street.
Yeah.
And he had a little shop there which did electronic sounds and things. And he actually reorganised his guitar to put some electronics in it to make it sound different. And that was an intentional thing. And it did. I don't think anybody's ever... A lot of people have tried to mimic it.
Yeah.
I mean, you think
loads. Jeremy Spencer.
Jeremy Spencer was a classic. But George Thorogood as well, you know. But they never managed to capture that sound.
It's that sound, isn't it? It's just incredible.
Yeah.
And it's the ones, I think, that were released on Sue. The Elmore James Memorial album.
Yeah.
The stuff like The Sky is Crying.
Yeah.
Oh, it's just like a knife cutting you.
Yeah.
And when you think, as you say, how it was recorded, I mean, there wasn't millions of pounds worth of stuff for him to record on.
No, amazing.
Record in the back of a shop.
Well, you look at Robert Johnson and those 2 albums of his. And I can remember that King of the Delta Blues when that came out. And those tracks were recorded in a hotel room. Yeah. With him singing against a wall with just, a portable recording thing. Yeah. Absolutely incredible tracks.
Those, that album, the first one, the King of the Delta Blues Singers with the brown cover.
Yeah.
I always remember buying that, and I never heard anything like it.
No.
He didn't sound like anybody else. Over the years, you got to know and you like it and the rest, but he didn't sound like anybody else. It took some listening actually to get into it because it didn't fit. It was Robert Johnson.
See, he would have been enormous. He was down. They wanted him to come and do the blues thing at Carnegie. Carnegie Hall in New York, and he died. They found he died. They couldn't get him along, and I think they took Josh White instead, but not quite the same calibre as Robert Johnson.
Well, they were different types of singers, weren't they?
Yeah,
completely,
totally. But Robert Johnson would have been absolutely enormous if he'd still been around.
Tell you one blues player, that I think I've discovered over the last couple of years that I think really missed out and was ignored was Big Bill Broomsey.
Right.
I mean, I think Big Bill Broomsey is a wonderful singer and guitar player, but he seemed to have been ignored.
He was more of folk blues. He did a lot of folk songs in amongst his stuff, though, didn't he? And a lot of gospel.
Yeah, but we could go on forever, couldn't we? I mean, we could go on forever talking about it.
Yeah.
I mean, there was so much. I mean, we've lived through a time that I don't think anybody else has. Music-wise, I don't think anybody will.
No.
I mean, there's been so many different things over the years.
And music was central to our life, I think, really.
I think so.
And in such a way that I don't think people feel like that these days.
I think it's background to the lives now, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's like wallpaper.
Yeah.
But we didn't. We loved it.
Yeah.
And I'd do it all again.
And so would I.
That's right.
Well, Mike, that was an introduction to rock music in our misspent youth, wasn't it?
Well, sort of. But I'm not telling you all about my misspent youth.
We've got more to come.